Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Binder. I'm the chair of the board of Movement I'm All for Race Equity. And we deal with a lot of issues related to race equity, social justice issues, convening meetings, as well as trying to get institutions to be much more inclusive of African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, so on, in our state and in our community. Organization is about 10 years old. And one of the things that we do a lot of is host community events as well as interviews with various people in the know. And today on the show, we have a special guest, Dr. Dewayne Mays, who is currently the president of the Lincoln chapter of the NAACP. And he also serves as the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Project, which helped produce the book, Roots of Justice, A History of Race and Racism in Nebraska. The book has many authors, and each of these authors have different parts of this book where they have different chapters. Now, this event was sponsored, the project was sponsored by Nebraskans for Peace, which is a statewide organization to help address public policy issues and educate Nebraskans about the role in challenging systems, institutions, and peace issues. It's probably one of the oldest peace group in the state of Nebraska. Dewayne has a PhD in agronomy from UNL. He's lived in Lincoln for many years and understands many of the challenges dealing with racism and race issues, and particularly dealing with some of the small number of people of color in that city as contrasted to Omaha. I do know that I'm drawn over the years, and I used to go there back in 1973. I was in Lincoln for about 3 years. Dewayne has served on many boards of directors, including Nebraska Appleseed, where he's at, and he's also volunteered many times dealing with the Malone Center, which has historically served the African American community in Lincoln and has different roles today compared to back in the day. Today, we'll discuss the book's evolution and some of the expected outcomes, and also issues what it's all about. So I'm going to start off by saying, Dewayne and Dr. Mays, can you share a little bit more about yourself and then get right into the questions?
Well, thank you, Jamal. I'm Dewayne Mays. I'm president of the Lincoln branch NAACP, and we are smaller than the Omaha chapter, but we try to cover this state of Nebraska because when we get complaints or we have requests from around the state, and they're not always from people of color or black people, but sometimes there are issues that people need help with, and they deal with civil rights and those types of issues. If we're going to talk more about a lot about the book, the NAACP, one of the agencies or one of the groups that co-sponsored the publication of the book, Roots of Justice, and we sponsored along with Nebraskans for Peace, and we were the first two groups that started out, but we are supported by donations, and one of the things that we've been working on is we get donations and to support the writers and the researchers that produce the book. Mm-hmm. And a little bit about how this started is really just by conversation where we were talking about race relations and why is it that people in Nebraska are the way they are. And that was a question that we were asking each other. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we find that people we have a lot in common with, but then we find other people that are very, very different, meaning that I'm from Arkansas, and I met people who were somewhat racist, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to see if I can go to the question. I'm going to see if I can cut to the question a little bit and go straight into each one because you give a bit more insight to what's going on there. After reading the chapter on African Americans, I was struck how much I did not know, even though I lived in the state my whole life. When you alluded to earlier, the impetus for this book, Roots of Justice, History of Race and Race in Nebraska, what was the defining moment that made you guys do that? Was it Nebraska Peace, NAACP? How did it all come about? In other words, what was the main thing that helped it start writing this book or bringing people together?
We were coming together, and we were celebrating Mandela's birthday.
Okay.
And so we came together, and we were coming together in the park, and we started discussions about how can we go beyond just talking about this. What is it that we need to do? And we didn't set out to write a book, of course, because we never had that in mind, but we wanted to go beyond talking about it, because there were people who were concerned, and we were having this discussion, but we were asking questions, but we weren't writing the information down. Then we decided, well, we need to write this down, and we need to bring more people into this discussion, so that we can get a better handle on it. And we started asking questions. One of the questions that we were asking is, why are people in Nebraska the way they are? And people were telling us, people in Nebraska are this way, people in Nebraska are that way.
So in other words, who started writing the book? What I'm asking, who was the main writer? Who started doing the main writing and documentation of the book? Was it one person or a collective?
No, we were collective. We decided to get together. Dr. Olson and I were talking about it, and so he kept pushing. We kept pushing. He was pushing, and us. Hey, we need to do something about this. We need to do something about this. Okay. And we were talking about organizing, and we went and talked to some people about how to organize. And so we organized, said, well, this is what you need to do. They laid out we went to Lincoln Community Foundation because we were sick, so you need some money.
So Lincoln Community got you some money. Let me switch up here if I can. I'll go up to another one. As I lived in Lincoln, and I also for a number of years, and also being from Omaha, what impressed me about the book was discover the African American contributions about the state. Some of the stuff I didn't know as a native Nebraskan. Are there any efforts to host African Americans or statewide events that bring African Americans together for nation building, or to help what we used to call back in the old days race work? NAACP used to use that term back in the civil rights movement. But in other words, after this book is together, is there a next step after this book to get African Americans statewide together, do some engagement or something like that?
We're basing it off of Truth and Reconciliation, what Mandela set up. And so we saw the book as being, we had to first comes the truth. We need to find out what is the truth. And so that's where we started to collect information and started to write a book. What is it? And once we started to talking about it, we theorized that the issues that African Americans deal with were different from the issues that Native Americans dealt with, and so we divided it out into groups, and we wanted to look at it in groups based on that. For instance, African Americans, we wanted to see and I felt like I knew more about African Americans than I did about other groups. But what I found out after time is I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I knew. I knew about African Americans in where I grew up, in the environment that I grew up. Which is different from Lincoln, Nebraska. Then I found out that in Nebraska, the things that go on in the lifestyle and the African American population in Lincoln, Nebraska is different from Omaha.
Yeah, as the culture is, as those of us are divided. Switch up again. I noted in the book for reading this chapter, and again, I found it interesting and thought-provoking. There are many notes that were made in each chapter. I noticed that footnotes and so on. What did you find most important, since such books often focus on individuals and incidents involving African Americans in Nebraska? If you had to distill down to an incident or part of that chapter, what did you find the most important from the book as you engaged in one on African American chapter?
Well, as I look at African American, I was first thing we started at that time looking at what's the difference. What is the difference? What brings about a difference in the population, in those groups? And a lot of that is based on what you grew up with and your environment that you grew up in. And that was the thing that we were looking at, say the white population, the black population, and the native population. What is it that make us the way we are? And we came to find out, we found out that people are a product of their environment. And when you bring people together, there are certain expectations. And if you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, basically you're not expected to be a racist. You want to, so there's a pressure to be a person who can deal with people of many different races because we are in that environment. But what you find out is people bring a lot of bring a lot with them, and they may not expose it until they are under pressure. And when they are under pressure, then those issues actually come out, and the real person comes out. And that's what we were finding in looking at the different issues that happen. For instance, you might know Miss Bullock, Miss Leola Bullock, when she came to Nebraska in the probably early 50s or late 40s. She was getting away from a lifestyle in Mississippi, and when she came to Nebraska, she was shocked to find that there were racist people in Nebraska because, for instance, the KKK burned crosses in her yard, and she was probably was a leader in the NAACP and in the black community, and so that was somewhat shocking to her. And come to find out, it's probably not that. It's probably a lot more than what we expect. And if people are put under the pressure, then they will expose themselves.
Right.
And that's what we're finding. We found out that we're seeing that some of that right now.
Right. I'm gonna switch up again.
So
I'm gonna switch up a couple
okay.
of you alluded to Leon Shanks, and I want to talk a little bit more about her in detail. I know as a lifelong resident of Nebraska, many prominent African American
Mm-hmm.
leaders exist in Omaha, Lincoln, elsewhere, and some people in Omaha
Okay.
don't know that Leona Bullock and her sister Leila Knox Shank, and I know they did race work, and I know them through Nebraska
Mm-hmm.
Peace. That Tim Reiner was involved with them in a number of social justice
Yeah.
issues back in the day, so I know them. But my question is, what were these individuals like, given that many African American workers are not aware of their contributions to the state? People who live in Lincoln knew them, the two sisters, but those of
Yes.
Omaha didn't always know them. But you
Okay.
worked a little bit closer with them.
Okay.
But what were some of their major accomplishments from your vantage point?
There, Miss Shanks and Miss Bullock are not sisters,
Oh, I thought they were
but
sisters. I thought they were sisters.
no,
They were soul sisters, though, you say.
no,
But yeah, that blind logical sisters.
yes,
Okay, thank you. Corrected.
they work together on a lot of issues, and here in Lincoln, but most of the work was done here in Lincoln, and one of the things that Mrs. Bullock, I knew her a little bit better than I did Mrs. Shane, because I worked with her in NAACP.
Hmm.
But one of the thing was persistence. If she got on an issue and she felt that something wasn't right, she went to the persons and talked to them about it, even if she was there by herself. And she wasn't waiting for somebody else or for a group to go
Right.
and address the problem. She would be there by herself, and she'd get to the point. In other words, she didn't beat around the bush. She got to the point. And that is what, I don't know how she could be in so many places or go to so many meetings. After she retired, that was her mission, and she fulfilled it until she died. I remember the day or two before she died, I visited her in the hospital, and at that time she was cultivating me and training me more or less in how to work the community and who to go to get things done. Already uh, she had pushed to get blacks in the LPS, Lincoln Public Schools administration.
Was she a
We
teacher, by the
had a
way?
few.
Was she a teacher in OPS? I mean, the Lincoln
No,
Public Schools? She was an advocate.
no,
Okay, I
she
didn't
was
know if
not.
she was.
She was
Okay.
not a teacher, and she was not a teacher, but she was community schooled,
Okay,
meaning
I got
that
you. As I said, community advocate doing all kinds of things.
yes,
I want to, if I
she
can,
learned.
I want to, if I can, because I know we're going to cut off at exactly halfway through and let people come back to you with questions. I was looking at some of
Okay.
the websites in our states, most post-secondary institutions. I'm talking about the universities and colleges, and I noticed there are no African American, few African American schools or professors represented in some of those history departments and so on, or even focus on
Mhm.
African American cultures. When I look at the universities, not only in Omaha, Lincoln, you name it, there are very few African American faces on these websites at post-secondary institutions. So my question is, how can we increase appreciation of this book or other critical aspects of Nebraska history so that people can learn and appreciate Nebraska's rich African American history? And again, there's a lot of books and things out there and articles, but how can we increase that from your vantage point?
Well, remember we put the book together. We were looking. We decided that look, we're going to tell the story. We're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, which means that we were going to take all of the situations that we came in contact with and learning as a learning experience and put together to try to understand why people are the way they are. And also, with the end point is if you understand what we've gone through as far as a culture, and this is all the people in Nebraska, that people of color have made a vast contribution to the welfare of Nebraska, meaning that many of the things that they have done are things that have been overlooked and they have not been given credit for it. And the value is not seen because sometimes it takes an effort to help educate people to know what the difference is, how that is important, and what it meant. And many of the things are overlooked or devalued, the things that are done.
Right. Got you. Got you. I also know that in you go to Nebraska media, they've never done there's never been a statewide program in Nebraska controlled by African Americans to get news and information across Nebraska. I know there are African Americans in Grand Island, people who are from Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and some of those towns as workers who came over, Scottsbluff, you name it. But again, we've not had public institutions do a great job of unifying us, nor we've had statewide organizations do that collectively. I'm gonna switch up again before we run out of our 30 minutes here and go to the next 30. Over the years, there's been a vast disconnect between African Americans in Lincoln, Omaha, and other towns in this state, villages, you name it. North Platte, you name it. There's African Americans there, and again, as I read the book, there are African Americans in small towns. That's how they got here. Some of them moved, obviously migrated. I was born in Hastings, but grew up in Omaha. And my question to you is, what can we do to build and increase that interaction of social capital? And again, I know earlier you alluded to some things you guys work on in NWC, but what can we collectively do to bring us all together? Or is that possible?
It's communication and respect, and also knowing that there are people out there. One of the things I've been in Nebraska since 1977, and much of my work was outside of Nebraska, and so therefore I did not have a means of meeting a lot of people, especially if you're outstate Nebraska. And but there's not a good way to know that there are still some African Americans in some of the smaller towns in the areas, uh, but you don't know them if you live in Lincoln
Right,
or Omaha.
right.
because we don't go out to those areas.
Right.
And most African Americans, we don't spend a lot of time in the rural areas. For instance, if you leave Lincoln and Omaha, you're getting into the rural area. And if we don't usually find reasons to go out there. There's nothing to bring us out there to interact with people who may be out there.
Right, I hear you. And matter of fact, two quick points. I talked to a person recently who said she was visiting someplace. She stopped some little hinky-dink place, and she mentioned the town close to where it was at. And the person told her, "You're not welcome here." So she didn't get gasoline or stop in that store because you
Hmm.
had a redneck white
Hmm.
supremacist Klan member. And this happened within the last
Hmm.
5 years. And so I know there's some places in this state, kind of like Sundown Town, that talks about in the history books that there's some people out there that really have this racist white supremacy situation. So I know that happens. But part of the challenge also is that we've not had public institutions doing a good job. I know years ago, Teresa Barnes McCagney would talked about a conference they had at the university, brought all the people of color from different parts of the region for a conference. And I think it stopped after a few years. We're talking about 15, 20 years ago, they used to have these big conferences where people, academicians,
Hmm.
would do it. And I don't think they've done that recently. And under the present climate, I don't think it's going to happen. We're looking at the neophytes running around
Hmm.
here faking it and making it. But let me get to two more questions before we get into the open it up. Um, you've been a lifelong, I've been involved in the NAACP for a long time. And as an NAACP director and doing that, how do you work with those other multicultural racial groups in Lincoln? I know there's a Native American group there, Latino groups. I
Hmm.
understand there might be an Asian and so on. But how does the
Hmm.
NAACP interact with those other racial groups in Lincoln, Nebraska? Or do you?
We don't do we do to some extent, and in later years, in recent years, we've reached out to, for instance, to other groups because we are suddenly realizing that that's a necessity because we need to know and we need to support other groups and a lot of times we just need to talk to people and that's what we're doing in this project, trying to talk to people from the different ethnic groups. Just have start out with common conversations. And one of the things about getting this information out to other parts for instance, out in Nebraska, you don't have to be an African American to appreciate African American history. And there are people out there who are open to understanding what went on and why we are the way we are, and having that conversation can really help us. We've done a little bit of that, and that's always exciting because here you expect a person to be a certain way, but they are trying to understand the situation just as you are, and they asking you, well, how can we do this? What is it that we need to do in order to improve relationships? And one of the things in building relationships is that you communicate with other people, and we have to create some atmospheres where we can talk to other people, and on a basis of that we can get to the point. We can talk openly and frankly about it. For instance, we had some some trying race forums here several years ago, and where we invited people in. These were all a lot of groups of people came together and said, look, we want to talk about race and racism in Lincoln. And so we had a film that we showed, and we talked about it, understanding race and racism. And I thought it went quite well in that we had we averaged about 100 people at each of those three sessions that we had. But the where we were hoping that people would take that information and that momentum to their groups, their clubs, their churches, and and it would grow from there. But it didn't happen the way we thought it would. We thought it would start growing just because of that, but it didn't. And for in my estimation, that was one of the biggest mistakes that I thought we did, because we had initially started something, but we didn't follow through with it.
Right. You know, we one of the things I'm always challenging institutions and organizations at these events is, what are your outcome? What can you measure? Their evaluations, and you'd be surprised the number of events that go on where people just do it and enjoy it and walk away. And at the end of the day, they're
Mm-hmm.
social events, but you cannot build
Yeah.
a pyramid on that. Dr. Mays, we've worked on that project, you and I, on the Legal Desert Project with a number of entities, particularly legal entities in Lincoln and Omaha. What have you learned so far from our meetings, and particularly in Lincoln, dealing with this concept that you've been working on with us on legal desert?
Most most people, we don't. There are a lot more things out there going on than we even know about. Nobody, the right hand don't know what the left hand is doing. We just finished a meeting today, and where we were talking with people from a organization, and the problem is there are bits and pieces that are going on all over. But what we're trying to do, and we hope to do in NAACP and our grant, is to try to bring people together so that we can find out what people are doing. And so when people come to ask for help, we can send them to the right person or group that they need to go to, rather than just floundering out there. Because sometimes they spend all of that time trying to figure out where they can get some help. And by the time, after the second, third time, they've given up, or it's too late. Meaning, if it's a legal problem, sometimes it's too late. Whatever's going to happen has happened, and they still didn't get the help. So what I hope we will do is we'll find out what other people are doing. We'll try to, then we'll build a framework that will help, that will cut through some of the red tape. Meaning that if you need something, this is where you go. This is who can take care of it. And that would make us, it doesn't mean we're going to be able to solve all the problems, but it does mean that we will be able to be more efficient in what we do, and the resources that we have in each of the organizations, because all of us are limited with resources.
Hmm. We're getting around that last time. Do you have any other things you want to share with participants before we open it up for questions directly to your information from the chat? Anything else you want to say before we open it up, Dr. Mays?
Okay. Well, just that we're in the process of working on with the roots of justice. There's a website. We have a website there, and you would be surprised at the amount of information that is in that website. And certainly the book is available, and the, the you can get the book without well, if you don't want to buy a book, you can download it. And but I don't know. I'm from the old school. I like a copy in my hands, and I think that the advantage there is you can read it for a while and you share it. We're looking at getting a audio book, getting an audio form. Those are some of the things we like to do. I know it's at a level that some the high schools might have a little bit of problem with it and understanding, and sometimes the complexity might be a little bit at a level. But I think that discussing it, how can we do it? If you got a book club, and a book club, you could do a chapter at a time, and then discuss it, because and we are certainly looking forward to any input that we can find, or that might help us to do a better job of what we're trying to do. Who are the people who have an interest there, would want to know this, learn about this kind of information?
You know, we do have in the chat where you can get the link and so on the book. And so again, it's in our chat. And again, when we post this video on our YouTube channel, we will have some additional information that you can read on how to get access to the book. But I do know when I read the chapter, and I haven't read the whole book, you're right. There's a little bit of academic scholarly work and documentation, so it might be a little bit above the curve of some high school students. But I do think the content material is very important because we know that in the high schools and the public schools, and oftentimes call them the Omaha plantation schools, they don't cover a lot of Black history and issues that students need to know. And they shouldn't have to go all the way to the university to learn some basic cultural issues in an academic institution. Again, some parents and people and family members teach their children at home, obviously, but there's some ways of knowing more about statewide information. I've been fascinated with the contributions African Americans have done in the state. So we're halfway through the point of our interview, and I want to throw it open to the participants or people who are there. If you want to ask Dr. Mays, Dewayne, a question directly or in the chat, whatever, and he's here to respond to anything you ask, and go from there. By the way, how long, if we order the book, how long does it take to get a copy of the book? I know I got my copy from you, and then I know that we got, I know the ACLU is working on getting some information. Really, I got some from them also. So my point is, how long, if you order it, how long will it take to get a copy of the book, Dewayne?
It took me took about a week to get mine.
Okay.
I've just placed the third order. For the first two orders, I got them within a week.
Is it on Amazon?
On my doorstep.
Is it on Amazon or no?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay. Other feedback, other reactions, roots of justice, and so on. Oh, by the way, I'm going to make a shameless plug. I have been following the State Historical Society's webpage and ran across. There's another book I ran into called Journey to Freedom, Uncovering the Gay Sons Sisters Escape from Nebraska Territory. It's a book that I'm going to be reading. I just read the first part of it, but it's about women who got out of slavery. We had slavery in Nebraska. Something happened?
Yeah. Let me, I got to jump off and see what this is.
Okay, well, okay. Let me continue then. One of the things we want people to do is that what we're going to try to do is get people to read books related to more on history of different racial groups in the state and so on. The other thing we're looking at is we've been focusing on Adam Fletcher Sass book that deals with Omaha Black history. Again, it's another case where a lot of the stuff you don't talk about in the school system, and that's one of our goals we want to do, is get our institutions to do more about African American culture and history. And again, that also includes we want to bring in Native Americans, Asians, and Latinos, because again, if you go into their various institutions, they don't do a very good job of talking about these books or information and articles. The other thing that I think relates to all this is the State Historical Society has a number of articles written by scholars, and some of them, what's interesting, are white scholars in other parts of the country who've written about things that happen in Nebraska. Again, you have to go to the Nebraska Historical Society webpage and see some of this information. There's two different historical groups in Lincoln, but one has a lot more of a scholarly articles and things on the website. So we'd ask people to go and look at that and deal with that. And it could bring a lot more substance, because right now, some of the silliness and the foolishness I think that happens in our respective communities, that we don't know our history. We oftentimes don't know all the contributions that people have made before we got here. And I think this is one of the things we got to do a much better job of. And then the other thing I like to share people, I was in a conference in Grand Island, Nebraska years ago, and I sat next to this white guy, and I was born in Hazelburg, group in Omaha, and he recommended, he sent me a book called The U.S. Naval Ammunition Depot. And this is how Black people during World War II got to Hastings, Nebraska, doing all that dangerous work. And there was a reported that there was an explosion once there, and then according to this book and other books, there was more than one explosions where a number of people killed in that work. Obviously, they were African Americans or people of color who were working at the time. But again, this is a history we don't know, and I think it's very important for us to be able to look at our history, but some of it has to be self-driven by us, and so we need to be able to deal with that. Dewayne, what happened there? I heard that noise, and I thought maybe somebody was breaking and trying to get to you. I was going to call 911 to come down to Lincoln and save you, because I can give you shelter, and I do have a victim witness protection program where you get too deep on Afrocentric stuff, so I want to help you out there, brother, but I had to hold my phone back so I wouldn't have to call, get my posse down there to help you out. But anyway, what was that? Something fell in the house? What was that all about?
No, that's my wife bumped something in the garage there, and so we're all right.
Oh, okay, good, because
She's all
I
right.
thought maybe we were throwing out so much heavy light we was getting people retina damage and they was afraid of what we were saying because, there's some Trumpites and some ICE people running around here. So I'm all prepared and ready for them. I got my constitutional slap upside the head if they come up on my in a strange way. But anyway, let's stop there. Anyway, a feedback from other
Okay.
folks. Yeah,
Yeah, we're okay.
you had me scared for a
We're
second. I said,
okay.
"Oh, brother man's okay," because I got to get my Batmobile, get in there, and get down to Lincoln and save your butt. Anyway, go ahead.
No, we're okay.
Okay, good. Folks, I'm looking at my audience here who's out here. Anybody want to ask Dr. Mays a question where I was amazed. I'm just kind of on a high on history and culture of African Americans and what they did in the 30s and 40s and 1850s and 60s and all the other stuff, and even the exodus they call them, where they were rejected and when they went to Nebraska City and Dakota City, different places. But again, you don't know that until you start to research and study. And I don't know what kind of job the historians are doing in Lincoln, and particularly those of color. But like I say, when I was in Lincoln, we didn't have this kind of knowledge thrown at me when I was an undergraduate. And again, a lot of this you have to do by yourself.
Well, a lot of this information is information that's in the not in the textbooks as such, but you have to dig deep to find it because and a lot of it is not there, and it's information that you might get from family histories and people who actually live some of those situations,
Mhm.
and so that's important, and we're still looking for that because we know that we didn't get all of the information that's out there, but we were hoping that we got enough of the information out there to stimulate uh, the curiosity of persons, and so when we are out there or other people out there, we have a means of receiving information that might have been missed. That's important.
Dwayne, the thing that I've been somewhat disappointed is the number of so-called folks who get their PhDs and don't write or don't read. Again, I know people are into
Mhm.
Facebook, and that's probably the only books someone read. I do have a couple of colleagues who actually use Audible. They don't like reading, but they will listen to a book. But I sit and
Yeah.
sometimes when I start talking to people after a few minutes, I can see they have no semblance or understanding of some of the historical contributions of the respectful racial groups, that is. And I've also been in meetings in recent years where I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of daughters of the Confederacies or mean white girls or
Mhm.
neo-Nazi type personalities, and sometimes they'll say some stupid, asinine, silly things, and you have to correct them on the spot. But what amazes me is that some
Mhm.
people don't know how to go back at them because they don't have the knowledge or they don't understand. Some of the things
Mhm.
that have happened in this state, and I think too often as
Mhm.
Nebraskans we put too much pressure or on the hands of the few elected people. Senator Chambers have carried an awful lot over the years, but there should be a lot more people in the state pushing advocacy and social justice. So when I look at 100 black men and there's not 100 black men in the group, or I look at the mentoring program and there's not a lot of knowledge about our culture and history, I wonder what are they doing beside of, dressing up in penguin suits or whatever. And again, I don't see that the mean spirit, but I find it sad when they have those contests. Some of the kids who win the contests are from other countries. My wife had a friend
Mhm.
who was a Filipino, and he was in that group, and he won, and he beat all them other African American young men. I'm like, how is that possible when it's your culture? And so I just think we got to do a better job of pushing our history and culture, and some of that has to happen outside the classroom because I don't expect the institutions that, again, part some of the apartheid to come and help educate us right.
Well, a lot of people in the classroom would like to teach these kinds of things, but they don't have the information and they don't have the knowledge to do know or research to back what they might say or what they might have heard, or they don't know about it. So they, as a result, they just bypass it.
Right.
And where what happens sometimes, remember, most of the teachers in the classroom are white, and so therefore they have no knowledge,
Right.
and they expect the kids who come to class to be experts about African American history.
Hmm.
And all that those kids might know is what their parents have taught them or showed them. And sometimes getting at the real information or the bottom of things, the parents, it takes time to get that information. They don't just often tell you everything. I know my parents didn't. And so it took a lot of effort to get that information. And most time they didn't write anything down. And I'm kind of a little bit opposite. I write everything down, and but if you don't write it down, you have a tendency to forget it. And I
Right.
like genealogy, and I like history.
That's so true. By the way, just quick point. I know that in Black Studies, I don't think they do a lot with Nebraska history. And again, I'm kind of disappointed in some of those folks that get their PhDs and they teach those textbooks from out of Texas. Again, I know they give you the syllabus. They can also give you the CD-ROM with the PowerPoints on. And so some of these teachers they got who are teaching these academic institutions don't have a lot of skill set on history and culture in our state. And some of them don't even come
Yeah.
from Nebraska, meaning they don't have that allegiance to Nebraskans or people who've lived here for a long time.
Mhm.
And I remember years ago, I wrote a letter to Dr. I think Nancy Edek, who was the head of the education department, critiquing her department and some of the lack of education for teacher training. And she wrote me back. It must have been a two-page letter that I wrote. I had it all refined and had somebody to kind of help me with the letter. I'm not going to mention the name of the person who helped me with it. But anyway, at the end of the day, she wrote me back 3 lines response and no response after that. So when I look at the teacher education in Omaha and what has happened in Lincoln, this racial agendas and all these things that we should have been much farther ahead is not there. And then the last point, the Department of Education, I hope they abolish one in Lincoln because I have not seen much from them. I know they had a social studies teacher, a person who's expert, and they eliminated that job because they started anticipating the Trumpite stuff. And again, the Commissioner of Education, the main guy, I think he was from North Dakota, South Dakota. I wrote him a letter. He never responded. So again, when I see these people
Mhm.
who are white supremacists, who hate black people, people of color, and they have the audacity to get state money, why am I paying taxes to these public officials who should respond to a letter that's coherently written and say, how are you addressing race issues or helping the educators in Omaha or Lincoln or statewide to understand important cultural issues? So, but that's been one of those issues I've been working on. But again, it's hard to get a lot of people to work on those kind of collective issues in our state. Let me
Yeah,
stop. Other
yeah.
feedback, other reactions. Reactions.
I would hope I was hoping to hear from some of the other persons who are on the line who would have some thoughts there, and
Maybe
I
maybe
think
the sound is
for
turned off.
me,
Maybe hey, maybe the Trumpites and the ICE people turned off all the sound. I mean, they might have muted them. I think they might have arrested them all and put them in handcuffs and muted their mouths. I don't know. We got a crack on
I think a lot of people are don't feel comfortable talking about race and racism. Even black people don't feel comfortable talking about race.
Wait. I'm kind of slow on some days. How do you help me now? Again, why am I uncomfortable with myself or who I am? Help me with that one. That's a new one to me. They're uncomfortable talking about their own race and race issue. Why?
Uh, they're uncomfortable talking about the things that happen to them and trying to understand why they happen. All we know is that it happened, and we jump on that, and without asking the question, why is this happening? Why are people treating me different from the way that they treat other people?
Wow.
And if somebody treats you different from the way that you think you should be treated, how many times have you asked them why?
Mm, wow.
Because if you ask them why, you probably be surprised at the answer that they give you. Most of them will say, "I don't know why," or "This is the way that I grew up. This is what I learned. This is the environment in which I grew up, and this is how we handle those kinds of problems." Most people can't they can't they're afraid to discuss race and racism
Wow.
because it it they feel like they're going to be ostracized. Or but most times when we talk about it, is you're talking about your feelings and those things that you learn from your environment. Did you learn to handle situations like that? And one of the things with as our kids were growing up is we had to teach them how to handle living in a predominantly white environment, because most of the people that they dealt with were people who of a different race.
Wow.
And so you so do I take on the characteristics that that are exemplified there, or do I when they go low, I go high? And it takes patience to do that, but people will soon recognize you for that, and you'd be surprised at how many people would really appreciate us if we would sit and talk with them. How many people do we communicate with who are different from us?
Good question. Good question.
We have how often do we have a deep conversation, not just a superficial conversation that gets us through, but a deep conversation about who we are and what we are and our expectations of those of people.
Hmm. I hear you. I hear you. Feedback, reactions. I use a metaphor that I got 7 white friends. So I know how white people think. And again, it's one I've used over the years. Some people find it humorous. Some people don't understand the metaphor. But again, when I read a survey years ago, white folks used to always say I had at least one black friend or something like that. According to the data, it's not enough
Mm-hmm.
folks divided up to be friends with all these folks who said they are. But the issue I ask ourselves is, do we have friends who are Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, other groups also? And then the question we've sometimes asked, we used to do table talk, is how many people have you invited to your home for dinner who may be of a different ethnic
Sure.
or racial group or from another
Mm-hmm.
country? And you'd be surprised the number of people
Sure.
who've never had that experience. And so when table talk came about and as we developed it, it was kind of a positive and a enlightening experience for many people in our city, particularly in Omaha. We did a few in Lincoln. I think we did a few in Grand Island. But there's some folks who said, I've never sat across from a person of a different racial group and had a meal with them. And so again, it shows how far we have come and how far we have not come. And so those are big issues. Hey, Dwayne, just a point. How many people are in your member of your NAACP in Lincoln? How many are there in your membership?
Well, but our membership is about half black and half white,
Okay, got you. What kind of numbers are we
and
talking?
so we're probably a little different from most NAACP chapters because there are a few chapters that are predominantly white, but very few. But with us, when you have a group like our group, it it can make for a good conversation, and I think sometimes it requires us having a little bit of heart to heart sometimes because some of the things that we do or we say, white people may not understand why we say them and so it's important that we help them understand why we're saying what we say, and that makes for a much stronger group wherever you are.
Mhm.
As we take this information across the state and try to talk and discuss with people and that in our rollout, it's important that we talk to people and help them to understand why this is important. If you don't know about this information, I can't expect you to have a sensitivity toward that. And what we'll find out, and what we found out with the different groups, is that a lot of the issues that we have, that the Asian, Latinos, and immigrants are having, are things that we can relate to. We understand what they're going through, and having that conversation is important.
Mm, got you. You know, the other thing is, I know
And
that.
if you don't have those kinds of conversations, you'll be ones talking about those people.
Right, I understand. You know, I was going to say one of the things, well, 2 quick points. One, when I was teaching at Nebraska Methodist College, I met an Asian student who was adopted by a white family, and she was confused racial identity. She was really bothered by her white family who adopted her, didn't teach her much about her culture. She felt unease at
Mhm.
the college dealing with some of those racial issues that came from the classroom and even dealing with other students and so on. So she mentioned that. And then the second thing, I know that oftentimes if you're Catholic or you're Jewish, they have confirmation classes, they have cultural things they do to help their own group learn about their race or their religion or whatever, particularly Jewish folks and so on. And the thing is, African Americans, there used to be a group called Rites of Passages, where young people were kind of initiated into learning about their culture, their history. And for some people, obviously in the continent of Africa, they do that for young men and so on, as to make them transition to understand what it's like to be a man. But we almost need to do that back in our community sites, and that's not going to happen if some of the people in leadership are as smart as a rock or dumb as a rock, as I like to say. But in order to teach it, you got to know it. And if people in leadership don't know
Yes.
their own culture and history, it's hard to do that. Again, some of our family members don't have a lot of formal education or don't read well.
Yeah.
And so that's when I think some of us have to step to the plate and do a better job, do these community-wide forums and groups talk about race and history and all the things that have kept us subjugated in this racist society.
That's why I felt that I failed our community when we started that, and we stopped and we didn't go back to it. We had an opportunity, we had a foot in the door, and there were people from all over, different groups all over that came. And if we had continued such efforts, I dare to say that we would be much better off now than we are, because now it's uncomfortable for some people to even bring up those kinds of subject matters. Because it makes them uncomfortable. Why does it make you uncomfortable? It make you uncomfortable because first of all, you're not accustomed to it, and second of all, we don't have answers for a lot of that, and it's not. And you can understand that we don't have to have answers for all of that. We don't have. There are some things we just don't have an answer for, and we accept that. But what we can understand is that we have to care about each other, and the way that you care about others is that you build a relationship with them. And that's what happened with even in our families.
Wow. Feedback and reaction. We got about 8 minutes left in the show.
You got some questions in the chat, Dad.
Okay, can you read them out? Because I don't see them right now. Let me see if I can get to them. I cannot get to them for some reason.
Okay, I can read them. One was, what was the most surprising discovery that emerged from the process of writing this book? And then another question is, how can we work with educators to get this information going forward, especially with some of the history or social studies teachers or local universities, community colleges?
Okay. Let's see. That first question was let's see. I didn't get that one.
First one was, what was the most surprising discovery that emerged from the process of writing the book?
The most surprising thing was that there are people in those different groups were as hungry for information and for to understanding like all the other groups, and they were surprised at the successes and some of the failures too. Because if we talk about Indian schools, and for instance, that's a gross failure, and I don't have the answer for answer, because that caused generational trauma. Generational trauma goes on and on and on. It's still manifesting itself in babies that are being born now.
Wow. That's a big concept, trauma, and people oftentimes don't want to talk about the historical trauma. Oh, by the way, the other question, I can see it now. The other question jumps out at us and says, how can we work with educators to get this information going forward, especially with some of the history of social studies teachers in local universities and colleges?
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that we just talked about at one of our planning meetings today is how we take the information and synthesize it in a way and creating learning experiences for young people, meaning that take that information and writing lesson plans that could be utilized in the high schools or in the school system. We need people who can take that. There are people who do that that's their job. They take that kind of information that we put in the book and put it in a way and help in a form that the students can utilize. They can understand it, what we're talking about, and they have an appreciation for it. And for the ones who are a little more advanced, they can take the information itself and utilize it. There were people who were demonstrating today who perhaps would benefit from having known what happened and why we were demonstrating in the 50s and 60s and the impacts. Here again, we're talking about things sometimes were traumas and how we were treated. But how is it that we can go through and have those kinds of trauma, but still be able to make it in life and be able to get through it and to help others through it?
Right. We're at the kind of end of the show, and I'm going to kind of give you a chance for like a few minutes, just closing comments. Dr. Mays, anything you'd like to share before we close out the show? We're at the end of our time.
This is a good opportunity, except we need more discussion, meaning that we need to talk. I don't think Black folks need to just talk to Black folks, but I think that we all need to talk to each other because it's a learning experience. We're going to learn from them and they're going to learn from us. And one of the most important things that I have gained from this project is learning from other people. There are so many things that I didn't know that I came to know because of the project. We had to work at it. We had to talk through it and work through it in order to be able to help the writers to understand what the writers were writing. And that discussion, that cross conversation helped us to to make the book a better book than it otherwise would have been.
Well, I appreciate you, Dr. Mays. It's been nice talking about this book because I think The Roots of Justice is kind of a book that we need to be having in our education institutions, and hopefully folks can get a copy of it. One of our goals is to have some more interviews with some of the other writers of the book and historians who can bring some more light to the background of the respective chapter. I know that you and Paul Olson were involved and helped with this kind of coordinating of this process, and there are particular historians and so on. But also, by reading this book will lead you to other historical events in Nebraska, and particularly as a focus on the issue of race and racism in Nebraska, is what we are solely absent in many of these public and funded institutions of higher education. So we'd like to thank you for being on the show, and hopefully you can join us, other folks can join us next week as we talk more of doing this whole Black History Month about things with their culture and so on. So on that note, we like to always end by saying, may the force be with you and Baroko.